And Michelle, thank you for joining us and telling us about H270.
Thanks. Oops, hold on one second for me. Sorry about that. The doorbell's ringing, of course, right as soon as we do.
Okay, we'll stay tuned. Always have. I love that painting. Orange and pink. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So everybody should have a copy of the amendment that was passed out of government operations, I think.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll just go through
Well, actually, if you don't mind sharing your screen, we'd
Sure,
appreciate it.
This is her name, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody can see that okay?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm just going to go through the sections that I think that you're interested in. Is
Yeah.
that okay?
You know what? Actually, for cannabis, I think we need the whole bill. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Sure.
But, you know,
okay.
much faster on the stuff we care about.
All right. So I'll speed through, and if I go too quickly, just stop me.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So this bill addresses both the adult use and the medical registry, as well as the regulation of the dispensaries. So it's all in one bill. So the first section is amending a section having to do with the Cannabis Control Board. And currently there is an advisory committee that was established in the original legislation in 2020 that was for that exact purpose. So a kind of group of stakeholders with various expertise and different backgrounds to be advising the Cannabis Control Board and setting up the new system. And this Section 1 repeals that advisory committee. This has the fiscal impact because there are 14 members, and while I think that most of the members are otherwise compensated, there is a provision at the end that allows for per diems and expenses for those members. And so I just wanted to highlight that for you.
Thanks.
So moving on to Section 2. Again, in the original legislation in 2020, when appropriations considered, the House Appropriations considered the bill, and the structure of the Cannabis Control Board is 3 members who comprise the board, and it's an independent executive branch agency. And there were questions about whether or not that was the best system going forward. And so there was a sunset placed in there for the Cannabis Control Board, and also a report back from the auditor's office prior to the sunset. You'll see at the end of the bill, the auditor's report is still required, but the date is bumped out a year. But this Section 2 repeals the sunset of the Cannabis Control Board.
Okay.
Section 3, so in the definition section that applies to the cannabis establishments, and when I use the term cannabis establishments, I'm talking about the adult use system. And if I use the word dispensary, I'm talking about those who are licensed to provide patients and caregivers who are on the registry. So in advertisements, there's just a small tweak to the language here that was requested by the board around what an advertisement means. And you'll see that on line 7 and 8, the language change is the board felt as though this would be a little bit clearer for them in terms of being able to apply the definition, and better, just more legally defensible in terms of how they're reviewing advertisements, because it is a requirement under the law that any advertisement that a cannabis establishment would be putting out there has to go for review by the board prior to it being published.
Okay.
So I'm just going to, there's a lot of just
one second, Michelle, sorry.
Okay.
Michelle, does that include billboards or a sign on a building?
I believe it includes all of that stuff. Okay. Yep.
Back to you, Michelle.
Okay, and there's a lot of just small technicals through to kind of integrate some of the other changes. So I'm gonna skip through those if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
Something I'll note here is the top of page 5. You'll see a new definition for cannabis propagation cultivator. This is a new type of licensee that is being added by this bill. So currently the types of licenses that exist are cultivator, a product manufacturer, a wholesaler, a retailer, and a testing laboratory. So this is adding a new type of licensee, and essentially it's like a nursery. So these folks would be people who would be producing clones and immature plants for other licensees under the law. Section 4.
Just like pausing you for 1 second.
Sorry.
That's like probably the biggest part of this bill that applies to us because it's creating a new licensing type.
Creating that new category?
Whole new, yeah.
Okay.
Back to you, Michelle.
Sure. So section 4 is amending the rulemaking. And so under current law, there are a number of specifics that the legislature has set out in terms of what types of rules and the areas that the board needs to adopt rules on with regard to the licensees. And so there's a few little changes here. I'm just noting that in subdivision 1, which isn't reproduced here because we're not changing it, is a very long list of the types of rules that are required for all licensees. So as we go in and we look at the rules for each individual one, if you don't see it there, it's most likely incorporated into that larger one that applies for all the different types of licensees. So the first change here is regarding product manufacturers. So right now, there's a requirement that only that a single package of a cannabis product can only have a maximum of 50 milligrams of THC. So that doesn't have anything to do with the maximum amount of THC that a person can purchase at a retailer. That is capped at an ounce, which is our state law for possession for an individual who is not on the medical registry. So that's not changed at all. This is just addressing the issue of how much THC can be in one package. So the customer can still buy the same amount. They just wouldn't have to buy them in as many packages, essentially. So if you were going to have right now 100 milligrams of THC in a gummy or something, you'd have to buy two packages. This would just allow that same amount to be in one package. The next change is at the bottom of the page concerning retailers. And this was a request made from the Department of Health to the Cannabis Control Board. They're working with them on inspections of facilities, and they asked that this be changed so that there be a requirement that retailers have an annual inspection. Top of page 6 is for their new rules concerning propagators. So you'll see a number of things here. They have to have rules regarding proper age verification of customers, classes of pesticides, standards for indoor cultivation of cannabis, procedures for testing cannabis, procedures for labeling requirements for cannabis that's sold to retailers and licensed into integrated licensees. Integrated licensees, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. Those are very limited number of licenses, and those are were folks who were dispensaries at the time that the law was enacted, and there were 5, they were allowed to integrate under one license rather than having to get one of each type of license. So they wouldn't have, so normally if you wanted to have, if you wanted to cultivate and you wanted to be a product manufacturer and you wanted to sell to the public, you have to get one of each of the different types of licenses. But dispensaries were kind of granted the opportunity to be integrated under one license, but they are the only ones. You'll see in subdivision F, they have to adopt rules regarding the regulation of visits to the establishment. and as well as facility inspection requirements and procedures. So section 5, this addresses the current law with regard to public records requests concerning the board. And you'll see that all this language is struck. That is struck in favor of this new section 6 regarding access to documents. You'll see the purpose there in subsection A starting on line 5. So it's the purpose of the section to protect the reputation, security practices, and trade secrets of licensees from undue public disclosure while securing the public's right to know of government licensing actions relevant to public health, safety, and welfare. Subsection B, all meetings and hearings of the board are subject to the open meeting law. Subsection C is the following are exempt from public inspection and copying under the Public Records Act and are confidential. And you'll see subdivision 1, that's current law, which is up above in the struck language. So it's records related to licensee security, safety, transportation or trade secrets that might be contained in their operating plan that they have to have filed with the board. And then subdivision 2 is records related to investigations, except as provided in subsection D. And then D sets forth a process where they create an aggregated list of closed investigations, but allow public access to certain cases where there has been a formal action to revoke, suspend, reprimand, or warn or penalize a licensee based on non-compliance. So if there was essentially if there was an investigation and nothing came of it in terms of a formal action by the board, that would just be combined in kind of an aggregated way, and the information would be a public record, but it wouldn't have the identity of the specific licensees. So sections 7, 8, and 9 are just small tweaks to the different types of licensees. They're currently the language it just sets forth who they're allowed to do business with. And in some way, some of them, they're kind of, it'll say a cultivator can sell to this type of licensee or that licensee. And all of these have been changed just a little bit so that in general, licensees can be doing business with other licensees. It's not just restricted to certain types of licensees. So you'll see like in subdivision 2, the new propagator cultivator is added into the cultivator license so that they can be selling, purchasing and selling seeds with propagation cultivators. Same kind of a thing on subdivision 3. Section 8, this sets forth what the propagation cultivator can do. So they can cultivate not more than 3,500 square feet of clones, immature plants, or mature plants. They can test, transport, and sell clones and immature plants to licensed cultivators. And they can test, transport, and sell cannabis seeds that meet the federal definition of hemp to either a licensed cultivator or retailer or to the public. So they're allowed that in that one particular circumstance to be able to sell essentially the hemp seeds to the public. Page 10, section 9, this is just what I had mentioned earlier, that, kind of taking out the limitations of which licensees can sell to which other licensees and allowing them to sell to one another as long as they're licensed. Same changes made to product manufacturers and same changes made to retailers. So section 12 is amending the section on the cannabis establishment fee schedule. And so the first change there is to manufacturers. And so you'll see here that manufacturers that process and manufacture cannabis to produce a product without using a solvent-based extraction method. Right now, the threshold for having to pay that fee is that they don't have sales of more than $10,000 per year in cannabis products, and that's being increased to $50,000 a year. But it's not changing the fee. It's just changing the threshold to pay the fee.
Thanks.
Mhm. The next one you'll see on line 7 is establishing the new fee for propagation cultivators. So that would be an annual fee of $500. And now we're going to move on to the medical registry. So out of the adult use and onto the medical program. So the first change is in the qualifying medical conditions. So the way that the medical program works is that there are a list of qualifying medical conditions, and if your healthcare provider signs a medical verification form that attests to the fact that you have one of these medical conditions, and then that's submitted with your application, then you can be on the registry. It's not a prescription for the use of cannabis. It's just simply certifying that you have a patient healthcare provider relationship, and that that you have this qualifying medical condition. And one of the qualifying medical conditions currently is PTSD, but there's a certain extra requirement that you have to meet under the existing law. If you have PTSD, you'll see that language that's struck right here. Is that the old language, so that they would have to confirm that the person is undergoing psychotherapy or counseling, and that is eliminated. And so essentially all this is doing is making PTSD the same as all the other ones there. There's no extra requirement any longer under this proposal that you be in talk therapy or psychotherapy. So next change is the top of page 14, and this is on the registry. So currently, patients or their caregivers on the patient's behalf can cultivate 2 mature and 7 immature cannabis plants. But you recall, and that's been the way that it has been since you've allowed patients to grow. So that's been that way for a number of years. But then when the legislature chose to legalize personal use of cannabis prior to the establishment of the commercial system, they allowed just anyone who's 21 years of age or older to cultivate up to 2 mature plants and 4 immature plants. And so under the current law, there's not really much of a difference between what someone on the registry as a patient could cultivate and what any other person could cultivate. And so this is increasing the number of plants that someone on the registry or their caregiver could cultivate for them, from 2 mature plants to 6 mature plants, and from 7 immature plants to 12 immature plants. The next change is on with respect to licensed caregivers. And this is changing the rules around background checks. Is right now, if you're going to be on the registry as a licensed caregiver, which just means that you have the ability to either cultivate those plants for a patient who has a qualifying medical condition, or you could go and pick up their medication at the dispensary for them. And under current law requires that caregiver have a fingerprint supported national background check done prior to being accepted on the registry. And this changes it to be a name and date of birth criminal conviction, Vermont criminal conviction record check, as well as checking on the state's child protection registry and the vulnerable adult abuse registry. Next change with regard to caregivers is on page 16. So you see there in subsection D is currently a caregiver can only serve 1 patient. And so this is changing it so that a caregiver could serve up to 2 patients. And then another change there on line 7 and 8. So there are some patients who are under 18 years of age who are on the registry, and they are allowed to have 2 caregivers. And there's new language there on line 8 that says that additional caregivers can be allowed at the discretion of the board. So if a child has family, splits their time between 2 houses, things like that, that the board can use its discretion to allow both sets of parents to be caregivers under the law for that child.
Okay.
Next change is on registration fees for caregivers and patients. So right now there is a requirement that if you are a patient or a caregiver on the registry, that you have to renew that license every year and pay a fee. This is changing it so that only patients who are on the registry with the qualifying condition of chronic pain have to do the annual fee, and all other patients would only have to do it every 5 years. And so the thinking behind that being that if you are someone who has MS and you're on the registry for that, that's not really changing from year to year, whereas chronic pain could be something that you could have at one time and not necessarily a year or 2 later. So my understanding from the board is that I think there's a substantial number of people on there for chronic pain, and they could probably, I'm sure JFO probably has those numbers for you.
They're here. We'll get to them. Thank you,
Great.
Michelle.
So page 17, this is fees for dispensaries. So these are those establishments that provide cannabis and cannabis products to folks who are on the registry, either as a patient or a caregiver. And you'll see currently they have a $2,500 one-time application fee. And then the first year that they're in operation, it's a $20,000 fee. And that's being reduced to $10,000.
And I just want the committee to sort of a heads up for the committee. So as I think, see a Commissioner Pepper, is that his title?
Yes.
Okay. Said when he,
Chair Pepper.
Chair Pepper, thank you. As Chair Pepper said when he came in. Next year, we're going to start sort of a cycle of regularly looking at the cannabis fees across the board. Once the system's really fully up and running, I would rather wait to change this particular registration fee until we're looking at all the other fees and how they all fit together.
Great.
Thanks. Okay, great. Onwards, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay, well then I'll just skip over that next one.
Cool.
Section 15, this is clarifying that that folks who are licensed by the Cannabis Control Board and regulated by the CCB do not have to get a separate tobacco license if they are selling tobacco paraphernalia. So if a cannabis establishment, in addition to selling cannabis and cannabis products, also sells pipes or rolling paper, things like that, that doesn't launch them into needing to get a license from DOL. Section 16 is an appropriation, and that establishes 3 new positions within the board and appropriates $850,000 for that position and for those positions also, and to acquire laboratory equipment for the quality control program. But this language was in the BAA, but your government operations committee wanted to keep this in there until they were assured that the BAA was going to be signed by the governor. And so it's still here.
Thanks.
And then the last section is on, I mentioned at the beginning about the—
Sorry, Michelle, 1 second.
Is that done? Did that happen yet?
It was messaged to the governor, but it hasn't done whatever it does after that yet.
Okay.
Back to you, Michelle.
Sure. So this last section is on the Auditor of Accounts report. I mentioned that at the beginning of my walkthrough, and that is that the Auditor of Accounts is to report back to you regarding the organizational structure and membership of the Cannabis Control Board, and whether that structure, you know, continues to be the most efficient one for moving forward now that the program is up and running. And that is just bumping out the date for that report for another year to give the program a little more time to see how it's operating.
Thank you.
Yep. And that's it.
Yeah.
Date this July.
I have a question about procedurally how this works if there's an appropriation in this bill and then there's the same appropriation on the governor's desk. So like,
So,
do we?
I mean, there are rules around like the thing that gets enacted at different times become law that would sort of apply, except in this case, they would just get stripped out of the budget if it passes in budget adjustment. Because budget adjustment is going to either pass or not pass in the next like couple days.
Okay.
And so we'll know before this gets out of the Senate.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
But Michelle, do you want to explain the part about like when some, you know, if there's two bills with different language, what happens? Do you mind?
Right. Well, that gets a little complicated if they both pass, but the chair is absolutely right. Is this is not uncommon. Like what you're seeing here is that the same language will be in multiple bills because of people's uncertainty about what's going to make it across the finish line. And usually what we do is we just the different attorneys will keep track of that. And as the chair said, we wind up if one does make it across the finish line first and the other ones are all still in play, we just strip the language out so that there's no concern about any kind of confusion between the various ones. Sometimes there are different provisions amending the same section of law. In this case, the language is identical, so there wouldn't be any conflict or problem if they did pass. But we don't like to have it in multiple places for obvious reasons. Sometimes there will be multiple bills that will pass that will amend a certain statutory section. And the language will be a little different because you'll be working with old language and it'll have new language added. And then we hopefully try to catch that beforehand and make small tweaks so that they can integrate. If not, we deal with it during the statutory revision process in the summer.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the bill from anyone?
So we need an amendment to section.
We do, but I think, so we're going to hear from Joint Fiscal and then we're going to hear from the Executive Director of the Cannabis Control Board, Bryn Hare. And I think Bryn's going to offer something else that she wants us to consider. So Michelle, are you able to hang out with us through the testimony or would you rather we?
No, I can hang out
Cool.
until about 10 to, I have another appointment at 3, but I can
Okay.
I can hang out for a little, until almost 3.
Great. We have another appointment at 2 something ourselves. So
Okay, great.
perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Ted, hi.
Hello.
You want to take us through the fiscal note?
Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm going to share my screen. And so in the fiscal note, we are going to focus here on sections that have potential fiscal impacts. Most of what we looked at was on the special fund revenue side and changes to fees. So I will start section 1. Just wanted to point out that by repealing the advisory committee and the Cannabis Control Board, they could potentially get paid per diems that would no longer be in effect. Talking with Bryn, that they budgeted $10,000 to $20,000 in per diems, but no one actually requested a per diem last year. So minimal changes there. Section 4 would increase the maximum THC amount that could be in packaged products. we're looking at this as keeping the level of consumption roughly the same. There's going to be potentially more gummies, for example, in a package. And so people may go to a establishment less often. They're not going to necessarily change how much THC they're consuming.
There's a typo in that second to last sentence.
I noticed it.
Sorry to point it out. Onwards to section
Yes,
12.
yes, and yes, I fixed it on the screen up above. I will send a revised version. Yes. Section 8 outlines the language for a new license for propagators. And so moving on to section 12, where that fee is established, it's a $500 fee. Cannabis Control Board estimated licensing 100 propagators in fiscal year 24, which would generate $50,000 in new special fund revenues. Section 12 also adjusts the revenue threshold by which folks would fall under a tier 1 license or a tier 2 license. Currently, there are 7 tier 1 licenses. My understanding is that these licenses are really intended for folks who are doing this as a side business, really small scale. And the folks who are tier 2 licenses are generating revenues far and above $50,000 in new threshold. So we wouldn't see any movement between the two. So not booking any change there. Section 13, the change in renewal period for folks who have other qualifying conditions other than chronic pain would result in an $120,000 decrease in revenue to the fund. If you have fewer licenses that are renewing annually, there'll be a slight hit. From what I understand, 700 patients of the 3,700 that are there are chronic pain. So that's where the numbers are coming from. The second part we looked at and considered for revenue impacts was the provision to allow medical patients to grow more plants at home. Talked in the office a little bit about whether we would anticipate more product potentially entering the legacy market and influencing demand either on the medical or retail side. We ultimately determined, and in conversations with the Cannabis Control Board, that this was a smaller measure and that for the most part, the medical patients were requesting to grow more because they're likely to make more concentrated products that you can't do by only growing 2 plants. So by doing 6, you might be able to have enough plant matter to really grow these more THC intensive products if you're doing pain management, for example. So ultimately we decided after looking at it to not reduce any excise or sales tax revenues. And then looking at section 14, which as discussed may be removed, but if this provision stays, there are 5 medical dispensaries in the state that this license fee would apply to. So decreasing their annual renewal fees from $25,000 to $10,000 per year would result in a $75,000 reduction in special fund revenues. In section 15, just wanted to point out that if Department of Liquor and Lottery are no longer visiting retail establishments to make sure they're following tobacco sales rules and provisions, it might result in some decreased staff time, but not anything that would be bookable. And then finally, wanted to point out the 3 positions and $850,000 that is appropriated in section 16.
Section 8, the new propagator license.
Yes.
The actual fee. Oh, there it is in section 12. Okay. And how many people do you expect to be paying it?
100.
Where is, there it is. Again,
Yes.
paragraph in section 12. Okay.
Yep.
I think it would be helpful if that, when you're gonna have to probably redo this anyway. So if that sort of clear equation was in the table.
Great. I can definitely do that.
Thank you. Any other questions about the fiscal note? Yeah.
Is there a bottom of that?
There is. It is right there.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Of course.
That's our job.
Fast question. Thank you very much.
Of course.
And Bryn, hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to Ways and Means.
Thank you. Nice to be here. For the record, Bryn Hare, Executive Director of the Cannabis Control Board. Would you like me to just start right away, Chair?
Say whatever you want to say.
Okay. So given just the conversation that I've heard this morning, I feel like it makes sense for me to just focus primarily on the request here for an additional license type of propagator's license. Happy to answer questions about any portion of the bill, of course, but I think I'll focus my testimony there given what I've heard so far this afternoon.
Thank you.
So propagation license. So as this committee well knows, the legislature is really responsible for setting out the authorization of the board to issue any type of license. So this would be a brand new license type, most similar to our cultivator license. So what we're proposing here is a $500 annual license fee for a propagator's license. This would really be our least expensive license type. So to compare, our small outdoor growers are currently our least expensive license type, and they pay $750 per year for that license. So the propagator's license would really be regulated very similarly to the way that we regulate our cultivator licenses. The statutory authority here would authorize the recipient of this type of license to grow up to 3,500 square feet of cannabis plants in their immature stage only. So no adult plants, no flowering plants, just seedlings, and allow them to sell those seedlings to other types of licensees within the supply chain, but they could not sell seedlings to the public. And the license would also allow them to sell seeds. So seeds that meet that THC threshold for hemp, those could be sold to the public. So the board is anticipating that there is going to be some interest among our currently licensed cultivators in the propagation license type, because it would allow them to expand their licensed grow space to develop their genetics. And it could also hold some interest for folks that are not currently in the market. So it's really an important measure for the board to have a licensed source of cannabis seedlings for the market to rely on. In year one, there was not a licensed source of new plant material for our licensees to rely on. So many of the seedling plants came from the illicit market. And this would allow us to really transition that practice so that our seedlings that are coming in to source the plant material that is going to wind up on the market are tested and are regulated to the standards that the board has imposed on other types of licensees. So Michelle did a great job of laying out the directives that are in the bill for the board to develop rulemaking around or set up the regulatory framework for these types of licensees. And as I mentioned earlier, it would really be most similar to the way that we are regulating cultivators. And happy to expand on that or to talk about any other part of the bill, but given your time constraints, I think I'll pause there.
Thanks, Bryn. Anyone have any questions for Bryn? Representative Taylor, Representative Andrews.
Yeah, would she be the one to ask about the additional positions, the two chemists and?
Yes.
What are the chemists doing and how does that fit into this?
Sure. So as Legislative Council mentioned, budget adjustment contains this appropriation of $850,000 to develop a state reference lab, and also the authorization for these three positions. So I'll just start out by saying that the legislature has made the Cannabis Control Board responsible for ensuring that cannabis products that are available both to the public on the adult use program and also medical patients are safe and that they abide by all of the rules that the board has created and the laws that the legislature has created. So creating like a centralized CCB operated lab is going to provide greater consistency in the regulated market across the supply chain, and it's going to improve the efficiency and efficacy of our own inspection and investigative processes. So the positions that are associated with this lab, the two chemists and the lab director, are the positions that would staff this reference lab that would be within the Cannabis Control Board. So these are the folks that will be running the samples and conducting the tests, the chemists themselves. So I can share that the idea behind this lab is that we would have our own resource to conduct audits of our licensed labs. So results that our licensed labs are providing to the industry players, also providing investigative support to our compliance team, conducting tests on product that's available to the public to determine whether we need to make a product recall, and also to really serve as like an industry-wide reference point for lab testing standards and methods. And it would be our own internal CCB staff that run that lab.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, I was just curious what the philosophical reason was for wanting to decrease the dispensary licensing fees.
Sure. So there are several sections in the bill that deal with the medical cannabis program, and all of those changes that the board brought forward for consideration were really designed to reduce barriers to entry to the medical program, and to reduce like administrative costs, both for the patients and caregivers that are registered and a part of the program, but also the dispensaries who are providing medicine to patients and their caregivers. So right now, our retail license fee in the adult use side costs $10,000. And the fee for the dispensaries to have their annual renewal fee is $20,000. So the idea was to make those fees much more comparable, because the dispensaries are really providing a service to patients. They have a much smaller pool of people who are purchasing from them than the retail establishment themselves. Retail establishments are open to adults, 21 or older, and the dispensaries are only serving patients and caregivers. So it's a much smaller pool. There's much less of a profit motive there. And the board is really trying to shore up the medical program and ensure that patients continue to have access to their medicine through the medical program. So the idea was to reduce the financial expense of a dispensary license and make it more comparable to what retail establishments need to pay.
And the original reason they were so different was because there was a lot of concern when we created the recreational cannabis market that the dispensaries would have too much of a head start on the market, and local growers wouldn't be able to get, local retailers and local growers wouldn't be able to get in. And I just want to make sure that the retail market is like much more fully established before we go to.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to understand it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Bryn? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
I thought this bill would be slightly more complicated than it was or seems to be for folks. And so Michelle's going to make that amendment now. Would folks feel ready to vote if she made that one amendment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So we'll give Michelle a few minutes to do that and talk about art in the meantime. Does that work? Okay.
Yeah, really, really.
And Ted, if you could amend the, yeah, thank you. Cool. Okay. Becky, hi. Do you want to join us and talk about art? Yeah. I would like to say that more than once a year.
I need to send this to Link.
Sorcia's sending you a Zoom link,
Oh, you want me to bring up
if you don't mind. Thank you.
it?
Actually, while we do this,
Yeah.
the role of curtailer can be played by Julia Andrews. Michelle, I hope you're hearing me, but I found a minor typo on page 15 that if you're gonna be amending, you might as well go for it.
Okay,
So at the very top of the page, there's some strike through, and then when the sentence actually starts, it's a lowercase.
okay,
Sorry,
that's okay.
I feel like kind of a jerk, but there it is.
Thanks. Before or while Becky's pulling things up, I'm going to find, an email from Catherine Benham, the director,
I just pictured it.
Joint Fiscal Office. I'm going to read an email from her. Dear Chair Kornheiser, H102, as voted out of House Corrections and Institutions, has a de minimis fiscal impact. There will be some cost to fund the per diems for the 2 legislative members of the working group. We believe the legislative budget can absorb those costs. Please let us know if you have any questions.
Is it on the website? Because for some reason.
It is indeed.
Okay, it's not pulling up on my, like I can't get Word to open. So just one second.
If your computer doesn't work, that's okay. We can follow along and you can be on paper if that's easier for you.
I have it. I will share it now. Okay, so Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. Do you want, what level of detail do you want?
Very, very high, low level of detail.
Yeah.
High level.
Nice things about art,
Yeah.
though.
You can
Yeah,
say
I get it.
the word art like 5 times to really round out our week. That'd be great.
H102 is making some changes to the Art and State Buildings program. This is a program that is already in place. And it works by taking some funding from projects that have received an appropriation through the capital bill. And there's a sort of a process by which the Arts Council works with BGS, and there's an advisory committee that has the chairs of the institutions committee and some other folks on it that sort of approve which project sites could be eligible for artwork to be installed and approve artists. And then the artists that are chosen work with a design team working on the renovation or construction that is going on in a building that is receiving funding from the Capitol bill to install that artwork. The statute as currently drafted I think was one of those chapters where a lot of changes were made over time. So sort of just had a lot of sort of like Frankenstein at this point. So I think this bill is attempting to clarify what the process actually is, like what actually happens between all these entities that are working together to get art installed in state buildings. So section 1 of the bill is actually just repealing the current chapter, and then section 2 is putting that chapter back in law and just better reflecting what the process is. So under this process, it's just a stress, I think, and a focus on making sure the program is about commissioning artwork for state buildings, the process of how the artists and the project sites are clarified. In terms of your committee and what is sort of relevant revenue-wise, I will scroll down to, unless you want to have any other specific information, is that there is an art acquisition fund where there will be money that is appropriated from the Capitol bill into this fund to help pay for this artwork. And the way this language has it working is that BGS is going to put, not sure if I've skipped over this. Where is the art? Oh, here it is. So there's a special fund which already exists. This is just putting it back into law, where $75,000 will be included in BGS's capital budget request every year as a separate line item to be put into the art acquisition fund to support this program. The Arts Council is allowed to use 15% of the funds in the art acquisition fund for expenses related to administering the chapter. These funds that are being deposited are from the capital bill, so they're bonded dollars. It's not general fund. And then the other sort of relevant piece for your committee is that there is this advisory committee that is established here, but is already, again, current law that this exists. That is going to be making decisions about the final approval of project sites and works of art. And the legislative members of this committee are entitled to per diem compensation and expense reimbursement.
Thanks. Any questions? Yeah.
I was having difficulty keeping track of what is the various teams and panels and things like that. So on page 6, line 14, you reference collaborate with a design team. Who is the design team?
The design team, I believe that is at BGS. I think they have is that correct? They have someone.
The architect is on that as well.
Yeah, a project manager who works at BGS on each project.
Oh, okay.
And the council.
And then the art selection panel is defined above. Sorry, I don't want to make everyone dizzy.
Well, on line 10, maybe?
On line 10 of page 6.
Same page. You have with appointed art selection panel.
Yeah, it's defined in the definition section of who is on the art selection panel. So I was going to scroll up to that. It consists of, it's a council appointed group that consists of the BGS project manager, the project architect, representatives from the occupant agencies,
Behind your computer.
arts professionals. Yeah, so it's a sort of a group of people appointed by the Arts Council who are working on both the sort of architectural project design side as well as the art side.
Okay, bottom of page 6 again, sorry. It's a quick one, I think.
Becky, you're welcome to stop sharing your screen.
Okay. There we go.
When it said, line 20, when it says review the final installation, does that assume that they can veto it or they can change it or?
There's no language about vetoing it, but I think that's because at that point it is installed.
Well, the reason why I ask is because I was talking to the curator up at the UVN, and they had an installation that had to go in the front. And after it was kind of, this is going to go in, the code enforcement said, no, you can't do that because of the various code regulations. And so they had to adjust it. So I'm just trying to figure out whether that's the same sort of thing that comes up or who has the final say in that situation.
If there are code issues, I don't want to speak for BGS or the Art Council. I don't know the answer to that. I think the idea is that the artist is involved in the beginning, sort of planning and design phases with the architect. So hopefully if there were issues like that, it would be caught. But I think you would have to hear from BGS and the Arts Council about how they would, deal with those sorts of.
But review just means they sort of work together for the final installation.
Representative Taylor, is that something that you would feel comfortable following up on after you voted on the bill?
I don't think it's worth pursuing.
Great. Okay, then let's not talk about it. Representative Anthony had something and then.
I just kind of got lost about why where the money is that we will be reviewing.
There's a de minimis
Okay.
impact. Do you want me to read the email from Catherine again? Okay. Great.
So can I ask Becky,
Please do.
where does a 75,000 show up in here?
Yes, it is in find for you.
Bottom of page 8.
Yeah, it is in the art acquisition fund section on page 8, lines 17 through 20. But again, that's a line item in the capital budget request that BGS submits to the governor, and then the governor submits to the General Assembly, and that's what goes to the institutions committee and is sort of the starting process for the capital bill.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I move that we find H102 as recommended by the Committee on Corrections and Institutions.
Second.
Representative Demrow moved that we find H102 favorable. Representative Anthony second. Is there any discussion?
What draft?
1.4.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Clerk could please call the roll.
Andrews, yes. Anthony,
Yep.
Beck,
Yes.
Brannigan,
Yes.
Demrow,
Yes.
Maslin.
Yep.
Meadows,
Yes.
Bodie,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Canfield,
Yes.
Kornheiser.
Yes.
12-0-0.
Cool.
Thank you.
On a roll here, clerk.
We are on a roll. We are, Michelle is waiting for something to come back from the editors. Michelle, do you have a sense of the minutes?
They
that
are
we're-
looking at it right now, so it should be any moment.
We're all just gonna sit here for a second on the live stream team. so.
Okay.
Hey, will you get me water while you're there? Thanks. We're gonna end the live stream for a moment.